Hello, everybody. Welcome to Preventing and Detecting Spammers. So thinking about repetitive messages that detour users off platform and decreasing the user experience can put a company's brand at risk, or even worse, put the user in a position to be conned out of money. But detecting spam content can be more difficult than other toxic behaviors because of the constantly evolving tactics used by spammers. Today, we have several experts joining us to share some insight. What is spam? What form does it take? And why should we care? With that, I will turn it over to our first individual, Mr. Jon Clay.
Hey, thanks, Matthew. Jon Clay here, Vice President of Threat Intelligence at Trendmicro. Been in cybersecurity now for 25 years, all with Trendmicro, which is a bit of an anomaly in there in the market. But and we cover lots of different types of threats. Obviously, spam is a big one with our consumer audience that we have and consumer customers, as well as our commercial customers. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Hey, Matthew, Neal Thurman from the Brand Safety Institute here. Thank you for having me. BSI, our mission is to formalize and professionalize the practice of brand safety for the digital advertising industry. And so we take all of these issues kind of from a standpoint of how we can best serve the industry and best improve the digital advertising supply chain.
And I'm Ryan Treichler. I'm VP of Product Management here at Spectrum Labs, and we help companies use machine learning to detect bad stuff in text and audio. And one of those bad things that we detect that can kind of mess with your customer's experience is spam.
All right. I love the diversity. As most of you know, my name is Matt Soeth. I'll be on a few panels today, head of community here for the Trust and Safety Collective here at Spectrum Labs. It's funny, whenever this topic comes up, definitely depending on your age, there are a lot of jokes about spam, whether it's in the can or if you want to reference Monty Python, which is always, you can't go wrong there. That part aside, as we think about what spam is, what is spam? Jon, we'll kick this first one over to you. What are some considerations when you think about identifying and labeling spam?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I guess you want to call them spammers or malicious actors out there. And one of the things that they try to do with spam is just, it's really unsolicited content that comes to you. And it can be in many different forms, right? It can be in an email, it can be on your PC, it can be on your mobile device. But essentially it is a content that comes to you in some format and tries to get you to do something that you probably shouldn't do. In many cases, it's advertising for buying product or services. Again, the person behind it is typically trying to gain money.
I think we see that where part of it is that desire to kind of fraudulently take advantage of people, but we also see spam that's just disruptive. And I think this is particularly interesting given some of the stuff that's going on with Twitter right now and Elon Musk and the way that actually in their news they're actually talking about what exactly is spam and how do they quantify that, and is it something that is bot produced? So does it take non-human interaction? Is it something that people can do? And I completely agree with the unwanted interaction portion of it. It's something that people don't want, but I think that can extend beyond just the desire to direct somebody off for malicious purposes. I think that's probably one of the main use cases, but not the only use case that we see, where sometimes it's just repeated messages of the same thing showing up over and over again, or they're flooding a channel with something that is just not relevant to the conversation and is annoying.
Yeah, and also, Matt, when we looked at our data, for example, in 2021, we classify obviously spam in many different ways, but email spam, we actually blocked 70 billion email spams that we're targeting our customer base. So the problem is huge. It's definitely, there's a lot of it out there, and a lot of it's going to people, whether it's your consumer or commercial organization. So like Ryan said, but there's a lot of different forms, and we'll probably get into those, right, as part of the conversation. But it is very interesting to see now. What Ryan mentioned is the bots, right? In the past, it used to be humans doing it, but now we're seeing a lot of automation done by the malicious actors out there, and they're utilizing the new technology to actually improve their capabilities and improve their tactics to target even to specific people or organizations. So it's interesting to be watching the phenomenon.
Well, that's a great call out, right? I think the range of ways that spammers are trying to push this content, like it could come up as a text, as an email, as a social media strand. I know I was an educator for years, and every time I had students come in and be like, oh, I just won this cool thing. I got a message on Instagram. Like, I just have to go log in and claim my prize. And I'm like, log in where? Like, well, Instagram. Like, you're already in Instagram. Like, what are you going to go log in again for? Like, that makes no sense. And so to see, as this stuff has evolved over time, particularly with the pandemic, right? We're so tech centric, we're remote work and other stuff. We could see it spread in there. It kind of shifting gears a bit as we think about it. I'm sure at some point everyone here, I could definitely speak for myself, has gotten that random ad on a social media site that says, hey, this product that's normally like $200? Well, today only with this code, it's $10. And so from a brand standpoint, Neal, what are some things, we should consider on the impact of spam when it comes to brand safety?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, ordinarily we think of brand safety as, an ad showing up adjacent to questionable content. So, it's a questionable video, it's a questionable social media post, it's something in a comment section that would, that management just doesn't align with for one reason or another. And there's lots of reasons to not want to be next to different kinds of content. I think for this, it starts to edge more into the realm of, how do I protect my brand? How do I make sure a consumer doesn't think that they are interacting with a reputable brand and find themselves in the middle of a scam, in the middle of, a scenario where they get a knockoff, something like that, where it's protecting, the brand is feeling like they are being denigrated, or, their reputation is being kind of besmirched in the marketplace through no fault of their own, because somebody else has decided to use them as a, kind of a stalking horse for getting information, trying to perpetrate something, nefarious. The other aspect of it is really from the publisher side. I think that, very interesting. Usually we think about the brand protecting itself. The other thing that publishers have to worry about is getting a reputation of having the bad thing on their site. Whether it is a scam, whether it's just annoying. I think, the publishers kind of have almost reverse brand safety going on, where they have to protect their brand, whether it's a social channel or a more traditional publisher.
I was just going to say, like, for what you're talking about there with the $25 knockoff ad for something, it seems like that's really bad for brands in a lot of ways. It sets a price point that they're not selling at, so it makes the user unfairly unfavorable to the price point that they have for the real product. They potentially are taking a sale away from the real brand, and then they're most likely delivering a product that is going to actually reflect poorly on the brand as well, because if they actually deliver the knockoff thing and it doesn't work, as like all along that process, the brand is being impacted negatively. So do you see brands actually actively trying to engage with platforms to get rid of those types of things, or do they have any power to actually monitor or do anything for that?
Absolutely. The brands are very protective in the same way that they are of any other fraudulent activity around their brand, the same way they would, try and, get law enforcement to go after somebody selling knockoff Gucci bags or Ray-Bans or whatever on the street corner. This is just a bigger megaphone to do something similar. And even worse, it probably doesn't even come back to a product that looks close enough that you get the the benefit maybe of seeing somebody else out there in the marketplace that has something that just at a quick glance looks like the right product. So yeah, absolutely. Marketers try to work, and I think the platforms equally try to do their best to figure out how to moderate those things when they are alerted to something.
Yeah, and Matt, that's one of the main tactics that these scammers are using, because they want you to believe it's coming from a trusted source, right? So they will impersonate the vendor and try to do the $5 instead of $25, and so these types of tactics that they use. Another one is that they'll regularly send out information about the most recent stuff that's in the news to try to get you to click on a link or open an attachment inside the message, or whether it's a text message and a link, or it's an email that has an attachment. They want you to open it up or click on it, because then they may want to introduce some malware on your system that then they can do something, and whether it's steal information or ransom you or something like that. So somehow they're going to try to get you to do something. But again, they're using the tactic where they want you to think it is somebody else sending it to you.
Yeah, nothing like instant credibility, right? Thinking about the broadness of this topic, I'm kind of curious to start thinking like structurally how to approach this. But I mean, I'm hearing so far like the terms I'm familiar with, like monetization, the groups that help set up the ads or control like ad revenue and how they come in, ads policy. You have ads policy teams, you have trust and safety teams, you have security teams, technology teams. I mean, are there folks that I'm missing? Shifting gears then, as we think about, we talked earlier in the conversation today about, spam bots versus humans. I know Twitter recently, their CEO published a tweet talking about how proactively they're removing spam, and they talked about bots versus humans and how tough it can be to detect. I'm curious, does it matter if it's a bot or a human? The volume of spam, like how, just thinking about, structurally, how do we sort of approach this or think of this in terms of proactive detection and removing harmful content?
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't think there is a distinction that's important between human and a bot. Ultimately, it ends up in the same thing. I think it becomes a little more challenging probably for the people trying to remove things if there's an account that is doing kind of seemingly human things, from a social standpoint, and that is interspersed. It's probably harder to establish a fact pattern that says I can proactively identify this as somebody who's about to do something bad. Whereas if it's a bot, chances are it's just churning out the same bad thing over and over again, and you can probably identify that pattern more quickly. So I imagine from an automated detection standpoint, bots are probably a little easier, but I suspect that is a minor distinction if there is one.
I think the other piece that you have with that, it will also depend on the platform. What barriers are there for account creation and things like that, because depending on the structure of the platform, it may be easier or more difficult to actually get bots onto the platform. And the advantage that bots have is if they have the ability to get feedback from the platform, they can adjust their strategy. So they can be a really effective way for circumventing protections. So I think the biggest thing is that, because of how adversarial this is and because of the financial incentives for the people that are running the spams and scams, you have to be aware of how these things are going to change over time. And if you're dealing with fairly sophisticated bots or bot human hybrids, it's going to be something where you need a sophisticated solution to actually identify what's going on, because you can't just kind of pattern match for the same message or some percentage of message similarity. There's other things that you need to actually look for to identify the fact that this is potentially malicious content.
Yeah, and Matt, one of the things obviously that we're seeing a phenomenon is the targeting and use of social media now. because that's such a big phenomenon now with younger kids and even older individuals out there using those platforms. These spammers go where their victims are, right? So they will look to target, whether it's a Twitter or one of the WhatsApp or one of any of those platforms. You're going to start seeing spam showing up because, again, it is lucrative. They do make money from it. And again, whether it's a bot or a human, as Neal mentioned, it probably doesn't matter to the victim. They don't care. They just care that they got, compromised potentially. So.
I mean, and as we've been talking about this, we've been talking specifically about the scam component of spam, where you've got the financial harms. If this is something where it's just unwanted or noisy content that's degrading the user experience, again, that could come from bot or human. It doesn't matter. So I think that the end result is the same, but the human in that scenario likely doesn't have the same financial incentive to be disruptive. They're potentially just being a troll or being annoying. So I think the defending against the just disruptive behavior is probably easier to defend against because the person is likely trying to be bad or whatever is trying to be annoying, but they're not financially incentivized to actually try and engage with people and redirect them off into somewhere bad.
Yeah, we've talked about redirection. This is where it gets fascinating to me because it could be to what you just brought up, Ryan, just the sheer volume of posts, right? Someone's doing a live stream and they're kind of like inserting comments repetitively to disrupt the flow, right? Or it could even be like unsolicited excessive comments or DMs. Particularly you see this happening to women online, right? Whether it's through, pick your platform, dating, gaming, social. So just the broadness of this is sorry, my trust and safety brain's kind of nerding out right now. As I think about it, there's a new phrase we talked about, and I wonder if someone could break this down for me, but copy pasta. I say copy paste, like, no, copy pasta. So I'm curious, I don't know, Ryan, if you could give us, what is it?
So, and some of our platforms, what we see is end users will have things that they've got kind of queued up to put in a comment. And a lot of times, it may be a GIF that's comprised of a bunch of ASCII characters to draw out an image that they can just cut and paste into a chat. But that image will be 10, 20 lines long so that they can do that. The other thing that we see that's maybe a little more nefarious than an image is we'll see like manifesto-ish things that people will paste into the comments. And so, if I look at platforms comments or I'm evaluating different types of toxicity, oftentimes I'll see the same kind of pretty toxic manifesto over and over and over again that people kind of paste in to try and seem pseudo-intellectual and be horrible at the same time. And it's a way for people to spew something or quickly insert a lot of content in that they've just got queued up ready, and it's disruptive to the flow of the conversation or the flow of messages that are actually going.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like early days when I had a blog on WordPress and I get a comment like, I love your post. Did you know you can get 15% off said product today? I'm like, did you love my post though? As we think about all these content areas and copy pasta and range, I mean, I think, John, was it 70 billion emails? Did I get that number?
Yeah, 70 billion.
Oh my gosh, I barely know how to count that high. As we start to think about like those numbers, what are some steps platforms can take to proactively detect spam content? I mean, and there's a range. We've already talked about barriers of entry, friction points. I'm just curious from this room, what are some suggestions, recommendations you have that platforms can take to kind of help limit this content? John, we'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, I mean, certainly an organization wants to monitor their platform. They as Ryan will probably get into the whole machine learning and artificial intelligence, that's probably technology that's a much better capability today than we've had in the past. The past was all about pattern matching and stuff, and because of the amount of this and the sophistication they're doing, you got to go a little bit deeper and more sophisticated with your detection capabilities. So investing in that type of technology is probably first and foremost. But also they have to identify what is spam. And we talked about what is spam, right? So, as Ryan alluded to, that Twitter right now is trying to figure out what is spam on Twitter. And they have to come up with that, identify what is going to be labeled spam, because you may be labeling something that isn't spam to somebody else, but is spam to another person. So it's a tricky thing to try to deal with for a lot of these platforms, because it's the whole free speech type of mentality that's starting to be, you're starting to hear about out there. So, and again, one person's unwanted content. Well, hey, maybe I wanted that $25 gift card that came, but again, in most of these cases, you're not getting that $25 gift card. You're getting something else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not the person to speak on AI or kind of some of the tech underpinnings of this, but I think the thing that I always go back to, whether it's spam or any other sort of fraud or any of the other issues that pop up on big platforms, bullying and hate speech and all the rest. I think having an attentive, kind of attentive user listening capability is always going to be your backstop, right? There will never be an AI solution that is going to get all of them. And so I think having policy around, hey, how quickly are we ready to pounce when something bad does get through, and how quickly can we evaluate? I think to John's point, we have a very clear definition. This is what we will pull down immediately. This is what will go into the evaluation phase, and this is what's okay within our rules. And so I think the clearer those policies are, and the clearer they are transmitted throughout the organization and staffed appropriately, so that the organization is capable of listening kind of as things are happening, and somebody gets that first inkling that maybe I just got scammed, or maybe there was some manifesto being sent out over and over and over again. I think having that organizational human component backing up the tech is really crucial.
So for me, the way that I look at spam is maybe, or the way that I interact with it on a daily basis is a little more narrow than John's purview. I think Jon sees spam across the entire ecosystem, and I really deal with it in the scope of platforms that have user-generated content. And so on those platforms, I actually think the best defense is a good offense. So there's things that you can do to insert a little friction on the account creation process and on the process to actually get set up so that you can send messages. A little friction there can reduce the ability for people to come in and create spam. So I think the difficult thing there is there's often conflicting interest, because you want to grow your user base. You're trying to grow your monthly active users. And so the easier for a user to sign up, the easier it is to actually grow that metric. At the same time, that makes it easier for spammers to potentially come in and create things that are going to harm your platform. So there's, I think, a trade-off in that can potentially be beneficial. The next thing is looking at what you're actually doing with those people, because no matter what technology you're using, ultimately at some point you identify someone as a spammer. When you identify them, what do you do with that? If you block their post and give them immediate feedback that, hey, we caught you, that basically to the bot or is a signal that says, hey, I need to change what I'm doing because they caught that, let me modify it. And so the more feedback you give them, the more you're kind of training your enemy on how to get around you. Remember, they're incentivized financially to actually get this out to people on the platform that you're working with. And so if you give them feedback about how you're catching them, they're just going to route around that piece. And so thinking about what you actually do with spam messages is important. Like, for example, with email, you kind of route it to a spam mailbox. You don't immediately say, hey, we detected this as spam. Like, this is why we detected it as spam. If you look at any email filters, like, it's not going to tell the spammer, this is the thing that you did that made us filter out your email, like, because that's going to just empower them to get around it. Same thing on the platform. If you detect somebody as a spammer, maybe maybe kind of mute them or send them off to an isolated area of the platform where they can communicate. It's just not communicating with anybody where it's going to impact the user area. And then once you have those things, then you can look at the technology to actually do the detection. And so I think the important parts there is looking at the things that are different. You know, one of our data analysts did a talk recently about, you know, helping identify chatbots in a platform or identify bots on a platform. And they found that if you looked at the data and you looked at the metadata about the users, the people that were sending spam were usually completely out of line with everything else. Their age demographic was different, their location was different. So there's metadata that can go into that. And then you can look at the content of the messages and what they're saying. So there's all these layers of context that can go into an AI model to actually detect it. But it's about using all of these things in concert. This is a big enough problem that it's not just I want the spam solution that I'm going to turn on and it's automatically going to filter it. There's policy, there's technology, all of these things that work together in concert to actually deliver a solution to kind of keep your users safe and to keep kind of unwanted content off your platform.
You know, Ryan brings up some really good points, and two things I'd add to this. One, like you mentioned, make it easy for your users to report spam. So somehow within your platform, how can I report a spam content coming there to make it easy? And then two, the other challenge we have is we need to do better about quantifying this problem. And that's where, can we get people who get scammed to report it, right? So EC3 has some capability. The FBI tries to track this stuff, but I would guess that the majority of people that get scammed do not report it. And so the numbers are probably way more than we see from them. I think in 2020, they mentioned something like $50 million were scammed out of people in the US. But, you know, it's that second part when I do get hit, how can I report it, make it easy to report it and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and to that point, like reporting tools, automated tools, and other stuff, it's really is a global issue. I think, John, you mentioned some data, like it's not just like in the US, right? Like you have these different bad actors globally kind of interacting with this, right?
Yeah, that, you know, obviously when we talk about the people behind it, you know, these actors are everywhere. We see a lot of it coming out of Africa, because in that country, you know, if I can scam people and make 50,000 a year in scamming, that's a huge amount of money in that part of the world. So it incentivizes a lot of these people. The other aspect is some of the laws in these areas. So like even in Africa, for example, it's in some regions, it's actually shown as good if you can show you're scamming another country's citizen. That's a good thing. So they want to do that kind of stuff. So it's kind of quirky, but obviously China's a big one, Russia's a big one. Yeah, but they're pretty much everywhere, and that's the other challenge. And they can mask their geolocation and all that good stuff because to make you think it's coming from a different part of the world. So it is definitely a global issue.
And one of the things that's really interesting, I have one more question, but one kind of touch on this. Like Neal, coming back to you, like the work of BSI, I think the last few years we've seen a huge kind of emphasis on collaboration between brand safety and user safety, looking at how platforms interact with their consumers and have certain protocols and stuff in place for user safety as well as brand safety. I'd be kind of curious, like touch on some of that work, like how do groups like BSA sort of advocate not just for brands, but for users as well when those platforms have a positive experience?
Yeah, I think the big social platforms, by virtue of the fact that they are predominantly ad supported, have been on this train for a little longer. You know, they have enormous problems with a lot of different, you know, bad things happening on them. So they have a lot of work to do. But I think they have recognized that brand safety and user safety are very much the same thing. If a marketer is going to come and spend their money on the platform, the next story out can't be about something bad happening. I think for platforms that are maybe, you know, advertising is viewed as an emerging or a secondary stream, video games and things like that, you know, that kind of realization that brand safety and user safety are kind of very codependent on each other is I think an emerging trend and an important one, and one that we're, as you say, we're absolutely advocating, because as marketers start to experiment and their brands come to the fore, in the metaverse, in video games, on other types of platforms, they want to make sure that they're not showing up next to the bad thing, in the same way that YouTube was the Wild West and there was the big headlines about what did my ad show up on in YouTube 7 years ago. All of these other platforms, somebody is going to screenshot or somebody's going to be streaming a video game, and something bad is going to happen back and forth between two players. And that's going to happen while somebody's brand is front and center of that stream. So I think, as these platforms become more and more, kind of formalized around how they're going to integrate brands into their experiences, those brands will demand that users be safe and that their brands not be put in bad situations, and they not be seen as financially supporting companies that are kind of supportive of bad things. Again, spam, fraud may be one of them, but there's a number of examples there.
And that brings up an interesting point, Matt, that we've talked about the technology, and that's with the platform and the developers. Think about the communications and the PR group, bring them into the fold, because they may have to have set comm statements if something like this happens. So as an organization, you want to make sure you have that whole group of departments ready to work in this, because again, everything's going to get out in the world, and we know, especially with social media, your brand's going to get a hit if something happens, and especially with the social media platform, because these people will definitely tweet out that you're a bad brand if they have a bad experience. So bring in those other departments to make sure you have it fully covered.
John, I'll even take it a step further, because in those sorts of crisis communication situations, it's not just departments internally. It is the supply chain has to all come together, because it's what do I as the brand dictate, where are my tolerance levels? What am I going to say? What are the actions that get taken? So yeah, I think there's a whole down the line, what do we do when? And the best companies in this space are doing tabletop exercises and figuring out, how do we simulate this so that we know exactly how the playbook runs the second something happens in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this topic, we've touched on everything, right? From like user level moderation, looking at, what data points do we have from, device level, how many accounts that device, what type of content, how often they're posting that content, how do we report it, remove it, do we allow it to stay in, do we send up flags, machine learning components, brand, corporate responsibility, brand safety responsibility. The only thing we haven't touched on, I think so far, is consumer education, right? This is one of the toughest things, I think, for any platform to take on, because I could publish something, but I don't necessarily have control over whether or not they read it, right? This goes back to my days as an educator, where it's just like, you didn't read the book? Like, I don't know. It's a human thing. So as I think about consumer education, like either are there things in place or best practices around that? Are there ways that we could do outreach to consumers to like, hey, here's what's going on, in a way that sort of empowers them to take action, but also doesn't limit their experience online? So we're curious from this team, our experts here, what are your thoughts on, what are some potential consumer education outreach opportunities that we could take advantage of and help our users? Ryan, we'll kick it to you first this time.
Okay. I think there's a lot that you can do with that. I'm actually kind of thinking about some of Neal's points and thinking about the brand experience, and because the spams are potentially so detrimental to the brand experience, the brands could actually use that opportunity to communicate with it, like, hey, here's the way that we want to engage with you. This is the thing that we're going to do. So if there's an example of a $25 spam ad for Ray-Bans, if you're Ray-Ban, I think there's an opportunity to actually communicate your brand value to the users on that platform and actually kind of get ahead of it and say, look, we're not ever going to be offering this kind of thing, like to help people be aware that the marketing that they're doing, the way that they're going to market isn't through something that's going to be directing people to it. Just, you know, even most basically, like if the URL is like rayban.shophere.za, like it's probably not Ray-Ban's site. Like look at the actual structure of it. There's things that the brand can communicate like that to actually use this as an opportunity to engage and build a better relationship with the consumer while preventing them from having that potentially bad experience with a spam ad. I think as a platform, you do the same thing as well. There's an opportunity to say, like, here's what you should look for in a bad ad. Although if that's the case, it seems like if you're that platform, you should develop some piece of technology to look for those things to say, hey, I know this is an invalid URL, or this is likely a URL that's potentially problematic. Let me flag it to go to human review or something before it's pushed out. But I think there's education on the brand side and on the platform side to say, you know, this is what you should expect. Or if you see these things, I mean, the other example, Matt, you and I have talked about in the past is Roblox. Like, everybody is going to advertise to little kids, you know, click this and you're going to get 10 Robux. Like, hey, we don't do that. We're not giving away Robux in these things. Like, this is potentially bad. Don't click on those ads. Don't click on it and do that, because that's potentially going to harm you or harm your parents' computer.
Yeah, I like the back and forth of both the brands and the platforms taking responsibility there and looking at these as opportunities to manage expectations of them. And I think in my mind, it goes back to policies for both. I think on the platform side, I have a 9-year-old, and every time he logs into Fortnite, and that happens a lot, you know, it says, I think pretty much right up front, we will never ask you for a password. And so that's certainly not the only form of spam or scam that might come along with a game as popular as that, but it's certainly one of them. And so every time you look in, it's just, you know, by osmosis, eventually, you know, even kids who don't want to pay any attention to such things will start to, oh, okay, well, I've seen it 1,000 times, the 1,000th, maybe I'll get it. And, you know, and from the marketer standpoint, I think being overt about the fact that the volume that everybody is transacting on now means perfection may be an admirable goal, but it is not reality. So talking about, here are all the things that we do to make sure that your users are protected and that we as a brand are doing the right things. Here's what happens when we recognize that we don't, you know, that something has gone wrong given the volume of what we're doing. And, you know, so we will from time to time have something that goes wrong, but we are committed to identifying, taking action, and changing our course to make sure it doesn't happen twice.
Yeah, I think the other aspect, you know, one of the things, if you're thinking about how do I educate the consumers out there, obviously the brands can do what we talked about here. We've been publishing scam information on our home section of our website. So anytime we see a scam, we put it up there so people can follow and figure out, you know, here's the latest one on Ray-Ban, or here's the latest one on Robux. And we'll do all that. We also have been doing a lot with internet safety for kids and family, where we educate kids, teachers, family members, trying to get them to understand all the different aspects. Spam obviously is a huge one for us. Scams are a big one for us to try to educate the population out there. So there's a lot of things that I think capabilities of doing. I think the schools can do a better job of educating the kids and doing something more in cybersecurity in that area as they're growing. You know, we kind of have to do it through the PTO group, but it would be nice if the education department would maybe come up with some new capabilities to teach kids at a younger age about, you know, digital citizenship and what's going on out there. I think it's a tough one though, because as we all know, as Neal said, the 1,000th time, maybe it'll sink in and they'll get it. But again, you can't make that a hurdle. Just keep doing what we can do and just keep informing people and keep educating people as much as possible out there. And hopefully, at some point we can get technology that can help much more effectively than it is today.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in Trust and Safety early on, and huge credit to Jeff Hanlon for this. He said, if you build it, bad actors will come, right? So just that awareness, education, empowerment, and hopefully agency for individuals to take action. Even like just talking to my dad last week, he's like, I got a text from Amazon about a package needing to be rescheduled. I'm like, Amazon will not text you. Like, do not click on that link. Like, we'll talk about that later. But it's knowing those things, right? Or knowing that family member to reach out to and ask those questions is such a crucial part of the ecosystem. And as long as we've had some kind of media, print, or humans, there have been spam, cons, and so much more. With that, I have a huge shout of gratitude. Thank you to our panelists today, Jon, Neal, Ryan, wherever you are. I'll clap here. Want to thank you all for coming out, and thank everyone for attending our session on spam.